Welcome to City Church. We are a biblically based, relationally driven, spirit-led church, encouraging everyone to follow Jesus, grow together, and serve others. We're excited to share this sermon with you today, and you can always find out more about us online at citychurchcville.com.
Good morning, everyone. Please stand with me if you would. In just a moment, you'll be greeting your neighbor. But before we get there, we're going to do what we always do here at City, and that is we pray the Lord's Prayer out loud together. Now, we are also going to pray or recite out loud together another passage of Scripture following the Lord's Prayer, because I don't want to freak you out when we change how we do our service. But with that said, just remain standing, and we're going to quote Psalm 23 together. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I'm going to be utilizing that passage in my message this morning, and I want you to do some of the work. How does that sound? All right, here we go. This then is how you should pray. Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth in Charlottesville as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Now what we're going to do is recite out loud Psalm 23, and I know a lot of people know this by heart as well, or you're very familiar with it. So let's go ahead and read out loud Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Are you ready? Yeah. You ready? Yes. Here we go. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Turn, give your neighbor a fist bump, high five, bear hug, handshake, greet one another. Well, today is Generosity Sunday. This is the Sunday that we've been moving towards as a church family for well over a month now. For many of us, this has been a 2.5-year process, but this is the Sunday in which we are going to be turning in our commitments, and we're going to be placing them in the boxes in the back. And this is a very exciting Sunday for our church family. Our church is 90 years old this year. And from 1 year shy of half of that time, this church family has worshiped in this facility. We've worshiped here for 44 years. And so near the end of the service, we are going to take a time where it will be an act of worship, where we will be presenting our commitments before the Lord, and it'll be a time of prayer and consecration. Now, the message that I'm going to bring this morning is one that I am actually going to take from the Gospel of Mark. And if you've been with us for any period of time, you know I made the commitment that we would walk through the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts for the entire year. Let me explain. What we're going to look at this morning is known as the feeding of the 5,000. It is found in all 4 Gospels. So if you're type A, and you really need to read the account in Luke of the feeding of the 5,000, help yourself. But Mark's gospel gives the biggest kind of colorful part of the story of the feeding of 5,000. And so for this message to be a little bit fuller, I've chosen to utilize the Gospel of Mark. Now, if I was to give a subtitle to this message, it would be entitled this: Little is much when placed in God's hands. Little is much when placed in God's hands. Now, in a few moments, we're going to read from Mark about the feeding of the 5,000. But oftentimes in the Bible, if you don't know the story before it, the episode you're getting ready to read won't make sense. And so with that in mind, what we need to do is read the prior story, because the feeding of the 5,000 in all four Gospels is linked to the prior episode. And the episode that we're going to look at is when Herod, not Herod the Great, he's deceased. This Herod is deceased that was there when Jesus was born. This is actually Herod Antipas, his son. We're getting ready to read the episode where Herod Antipas beheads John the Baptist and has his head presented at his birthday party. How fun is that? Now, what we need to know are a couple of things about John the Baptist. First of all, he literally was as famous as Billy Graham is today. We know this from extra biblical writings like Josephus's Antiquities. John the Baptist is mentioned many times in his writings. So John the Baptist is a very famous guy. He's also Jesus's cousin, which is interesting. Now, where we're getting ready to read in our story is where a young girl dances in front of Herod Antipas and all of the leaders of Galilee, and at the request of her mother, whose name is Herodias, she asks for the head of John the Baptist. Now, here's what we need to know. Herod Antipas has married his brother's wife. His brother's name is Philip. And however that worked out, the Bible doesn't tell us, but he ends up with his brother's wife. Her name is Herodias. John the Baptist, who is the last of the Old Testament prophets, does what all Old Testament prophets do. He confronted the king when the king was in sin. And so the text teaches us that Herodias held a grudge against John because he kept rebuking Herod Antipas for having married her. And so picture it this way. The young girl that's going to dance in front of him is his niece. You just got to catch all of this. Now let's read our episode. And this episode's very important to understand the feeding of the 5,000. So here we go. Mark chapter 6, verses 21 through 29. Here's our story. Finally, the opportune time came, and on his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. So the only way you could get into his birthday party was to have an official royal invitation. Reading on. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to her, "Ask for me anything you want, and I will give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, which in the ancient world is irrevocable. He promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you up to half of my kingdom." Now, can you imagine? What kind of dance was that? It's not the kind of dance you do in church. Trust me. Now remember, she's his niece. So she goes to her mom and says, "What is it that I'm supposed to ask for?" "The head of John the Baptist," Herodias says. At once the girl hurried to the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And the king was greatly distressed because of his oaths, which were irrevocable, his dinner guests, which are all the elites of Galilee, and yet he did not want to refuse her. So immediately he sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in prison, brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl. She gave it to her mother. And on hearing this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Let's sit with this story for just a moment. You cannot overstate the familial dysfunction. What kind of a mom would ask her daughter to bring in the head of someone into a banquet? Who would do that? And when we look at our story, it's just rippling with dysfunction. And the dance? Imagine the dance. You don't want to. At the end of the dance, he offers half of his kingdom. How dysfunctional. And can you imagine having the king of your region bringing in Billy Graham's head on a platter and presenting it at the birthday party? How bizarre. Think of it this way. Can you imagine the effect of this on the citizens of Galilee and for Jesus and his disciples? You see, the shadow of death has just covered the Galilee. Everyone knows what Herod did. He murdered the prophet of God. That's something even in the Older Testament kings didn't tend to do, but he did. Some of the Older Testament kings tried, but this guy succeeds. And remember, John the Baptist is Jesus' cousin. Imagine the grief. That episode in all four Gospels is mentioned just before the feeding of the 5,000. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44, where Jesus feeds the 5,000. This is the center of our sermon this morning. Here's what the text says. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, which biblical scholars tell us, the people of the Galilee wanted to go see how this rabbi was responding to the murder of his family member. What's he going to do? Is he going to retaliate? Is he going to kill someone? Is he going to declare war on Herod? What's he going to do? So people are coming and going, and the text says there were so many people coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. And he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Jesus does not retaliate. Instead, he takes his disciples to a quiet place. The text is very clear what he does. Reading on it, so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. By the way, have you ever had a season of life where you have your plans, but it just seems like your plans get overwhelmed? And you kind of have your path plotted, but there's so much stuff happening, you just need a break. How many of you are that way right now? Those people that are overrunning your life, feel free to look at them at this moment and let them know. So what Jesus does is he takes his disciples away in a boat to a solitary place. He knows they need rest. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like, what? Sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already late. Send the people away." What a suggestion. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy them something to eat. But he answered, "You give." Don't send them away. You give them something to eat. And they said to him, that would take more than a half year's wages. By the way, in the Greek, it says that would take more than 200 denarii. And 1 denarii is a day's wage. It would take over 200 days of wages to buy these people food. Are we going to go and spend that much in bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. By the way, John's gospel tells us that this was the bag lunch of a little kid. And in the Greek, it says 5 little barley loaves and 2 little fish. So imagine 5 Ritz crackers and 2 minnows or sardines. Reading on. By the way, I added that. Reading on. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. By the way, I just want to pause. If you have administrative skills, how many of you here have administrative skills? Don't be shy, but just kind of raise your hand. All gifts come from God. By the way, I saw a wife look at a husband and lift your hand. You have that. And he just, listen. This miracle would make 0 sense without the gift of administration. And if you have the gift of administration, that's a gift from God, and it's needed. Reading on. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Wow. By the way, I wanted to know how much fish it would take to feed 5,000 people. And so we have a lady at our church that owns a catering company. And so I called her. We'll call her Sandy, because that's her name. I called up Sandy, and I said, hey, Sandy, how much fish would you need? And here's what she texted me back. She said, for 100 people, you need 25 pounds of fish. Now, I'm not good at math, so I got out my calculator to make sure I got this right. For 1,000 people, you will need 250 pounds, and for 5,000 people, you will need 1,250 pounds of fish, or fish by the pounds of fish, which, by the way, is simply a 4-ounce serving. Now, to make matters worse, if you recall our reading, it read that there were men, which means there's women and children. So conservatively, there's probably 3,000 more people. So now you have 8,000 people that are being fed by this little bag lunch. And I did the math. You'd need 2,000 pounds of fish. Now, when we think about what Jesus has just done, normally in our sermons, we only have feet to your faith. But what I want to do now is talk about faith to Jesus' faith. You see, what we're getting ready to read again is Psalm 23. And I just want to read it again for us briefly. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Oh, by the way, if you remember in Mark's gospel, he had the people sit down in the green grass. He leads me beside still waters. He took his disciples in a boat. He restores my soul. He said to them, let's get into the boat. You need to be refreshed. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death is over the Galilee because of Herod Antipas murdering John the Baptist. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me. That's stunning. Jesus, in the middle of nowhere, feeds 8,000 people with 2,000 pounds of fish, starting with 5 loaves and 2 sardines. He prepared a table before them. You prepare a table before them in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. There were 12 basketful left. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Some very astute biblical scholars have tapped into this, and what they're telling you is Jesus has just become the shepherd of Israel. He has just literally walked out the 23rd Psalm. But I want you to picture how he put feet to his faith. Look at it this way. Herod had a banquet, and it was a banquet of death. Jesus has a banquet, and it's a banquet of life. Herod's, invitation only, and you have to be at a certain status. Jesus, anyone can come. You see, there are two kingdoms in this world, and there are two kings. There's the kingdom of empire and the kingdom of shalom. And Jesus is the king of the king of the kingdom of shalom. Again, I want you to realize that Jesus provides a banquet of life. He provides a banquet of life. So how do you and I put feet to your faith with this simple message? What does it look like? Well, let's take a look at where the disciples participate in the story. They participate by going and getting a little boy's lunch, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, with that said, I often think about this little kid. When I was young, I remember what it was like to sit in class in school and be starving. How many of you know what I'm talking about? You would sit and you just couldn't wait to get to the cafeteria. Am I right or wrong? Anyone else ever have that experience? Just imagine this little kid. He's been clutching his bag lunch the entire time. Evening has now set, and the disciples come and they go, "Give me your lunch." If the kid was a teenager, he would tell them something that would have been really ungodly, I'm sure. "That's your problem, I've got mine. Why didn't you plan ahead?" That's the kind way of putting it. But here's what we have. We have 5, according to the Gospel of John, little barley loaves and 2 little fish. And here's the thing. That's all they had to give. That's it. But you see, I believe that little is much when placed in God's hands. I truly do. You see, when we stepped into this capital campaign, and the numbers came back from the building company, and I was looking at $4.6 million to do what God's calling us to do. I thought, how in the world is this ever going to happen? But then can you imagine Jesus looking in that little bag lunch, and the disciples are thinking, what's even the point? 5 little loaves, 2 fish. But the text tells us in Mark 6:41, that taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up into heaven, Jesus gave thanks and broke the loaves. You see, nowhere else in the Bible does he ever do this exactly like this. This one time, he does this where he holds it up before God and he gives thanks and he prays, and then they begin to multiply. You see, it was a moment of consecration and prayer. If I was in the front row of that gathering, I would have said, "Jesus, hook me up, man. I'm starving. 5 loaves, 2 fish, it's never gonna happen." But at the end, 8,000 people, and in the Greek it says they were completely satisfied. They were filled to the point where each disciple had their own basket to take home. You imagine you're the disciples and you've gone through the crowd. Anyone have anything? Anyone have anything? Some little kid holds out bubble gum. Nah, we can't use that. Another kid's got a bag lunch. He's trying to hide it from you. Don't hold out, kid. Give it to me. And Jesus feeds 8,000 people. When I think about what God has called our church to do, there are some people that have and will give a lot of money. But for some of us, it will be 5 loaves and 2 fish. I don't care if it's a lot of money or little. When it's put into God's hand, when you put anything you have into God's hands, I can promise you little is much. You see, this is a story ultimately about 2 kingdoms. There's a kingdom that provides banquets of death. There's another kingdom that provides banquets of life. In the first kingdom, in Herod Antipas's kingdom, invitation only. In Jesus's, come if you want to, and come as you are. My prayer is, whatever we do as a church, that we would always provide a banquet of life.